Kids back in the day used to do a bunch of silly things to have some fun. Whenever we couldn't play outside, my friends and I would spend our day indoors while doing a bunch of prank calls. It was quite enjoyable fooling the people at the other end of the line. We would dial random numbers from the residential directory, and we would get pretty excited whenever the call was received by the right person on the list. We made up stories and scenarios in an attempt to trick the receiver of the call. Sometimes, we would pretend that we were officers or a service provider, then act as if they were in trouble of some sort. And sometimes, we would pretend as if we knew them personally, then spread a rumor to stir things up. But just like any other silly things, going too far got us in a serious trouble that we couldn't get out of. We were just a bunch of bored kids who didn't know better, and we had to learn the hard way when to stop. There was a particular call that we did which led to a crime. We made an enemy out of an unforgiving man who hunted us down. Jason had a voice that was too mature for his age, which we often used to our advantage. And Gab's made-up stories could get pretty convincing at times since he was a very good liar. Just like any other day of prank calling, I simply chose a random number. Nobody would have guessed that it belonged to the household of a madman. When a man answered the call, Jason pretended to be a close friend of someone in their neighborhood. He sounded fairly calm and entertained our call. Jason whispered to us and said he heard a voice of a woman. Based on the age of the voice and the sound at the background, we made a wild guess about the man's life. When we got him to listen, Gab faked a story about his wife cheating on him. We used this story several times before, but we never got them to believe it. And some of the voices we heard in the background were their sisters and not their wives. But this time around, our guess was right. We were grinning from ear to ear when the man on the other end of the line bought the lie. In addition to that, he started to rant. The man said that he had been suspecting his wife for having an affair with the neighbor. He started mentioning names, and all that was left for us to do was agree and let him talk. He sounded genuinely mad. We felt quite satisfied for being able to fully trick an adult. We never thought that it would go this well. After a couple of minutes, our smiles were wiped off by anxiousness as the man began to argue with his wife. We could hear the argument escalating over the phone, and so we started feeling guilty for what we did. We wanted to confess about our lie, but we couldn't even cut through his overwhelming yells of rage. We heard the woman started sobbing in the background, and the man was too furious to listen to his wife. Sadly, the situation got out of hand. He dropped the phone but didn't hang up, and we heard everything as it happened. We heard a bunch of banging and things getting thrown all over. The woman's sobbing turned to screams of agony. Her husband, whom we had angered with a playful lie, was growling like an animal along with thumps on the floor. She was begging for her life until her voice grew faint, and then everything went silent. When the man that realized that he did not end the call, he picked the phone back up as he was catching his breath. We hung up immediately after realizing what just happened. We ran to our parents and told them what we heard over the phone. Needless to say, they scolded us for doing a prank that got out of hand. They called the authorities on our behalf, and they went to the address of the residence written in the directory. Unfortunately, our suspicions were right. They found the dead body of the woman on the floor. She was beaten to death, and her face was smashed beyond recognition. However, the killer was nowhere to be seen. A few blocks from the house, someone also tried to break into someone's house. The owner identified the assailant, and it was the same person who killed his wife. We suspected that it was the man whom we assumed was having an affair with his woman. As the investigation was taking place, he returned to the man's house a few days later. This time around, he managed to break in and he killed him as well. A couple of months after the incident, the authorities still couldn't find the killer's whereabouts. While the three of us were still haunted by our guilt, Jason's household began to receive random calls. The person calling would hang up whenever they answered the phone, but that was until Jason was the one who happened to receive the call. He was jittering in fear as he told us who called, and he said that it was the man who killed his wife and his neighbor. He found out about the prank when the story was covered by the news, and he was able to track down Jason's residence. We feared that he would call us next, and we were right. After a few days, Gab's household also received unidentified calls. Just like at Jason's, the caller only spoke when Gab was the one who answered the phone. Gab was more composed than any of us, and he managed to strike a short conversation with the killer. He was blaming us for the death of his wife even though he was the one who brutally pummeled her to death. We couldn't deny that we also played a big part in the murder. It was us who angered him which made him do it. I was struggling to sleep at night because of what we did, and my guilt was overwhelmed by fear when I realized that he was about to call me next. We told the authorities about the calls, and they bugged our phone in the house so they could trace where it came from once the killer would call. However, he was wiser than we thought. It would take at least a minute before the device would be able to trace where the call was coming from. but it only took a few seconds for him to say what he wanted to say to me. Right when I answered the call, he didn't waste any time to tell me that he would come to kill us. Right after the threat, we were put under tight security. However, they couldn't keep an eye on us every time. Jason in particular did not want to be monitored every day, and he snuck out when he had the chance just to visit the arcade. It was then when the killer had the opportunity to strike, and he did. The morning after Jason snuck out from the security, they found his dead body on piles of trash in the alley. A woman and her neighbor were killed because of our prank call, and now my friend was murdered. Unfortunately, that was not the end of this nightmare. The security watched over us 24/7 since Jason's murder, but the killer still found a way to attack. While the security fell asleep in their car, the killer cut the power lines in our house. Thinking that he would come after me next, they concentrated the officers around our place. Unfortunately, only 2 officers remained to watch over Gab, and it wasn't enough to stop the killer from burning the house down. Because of the threat, Gab's parents installed metal rails on their windows. The killer padlocked the doors from the outside and started a fire with a homemade Molotov. It reduced everything to cinders when it reached the gas line. It all happened too fast, and there was nothing they could do to save Gab and his family. The madman used the ruckus of the fire to throw off the authorities and redirected their attention. As the house was engulfed in flames, he drove a car right into our house while there were only 2 officers on guard. Unfortunately for him, his plan didn't go as smoothly as he wanted. Dad's filing cabinet fell right into his door, and he wasn't able to get out of the car. He fired his gun through the windshield, but we managed to take cover in the kitchen while the officers rushed towards him. He reversed the car and was able to get away, but only for a moment. There were already a number of authorities waiting for his arrival, and more had arrived because of what he did to Gab's house, which was just a few blocks away from ours. They all chased after him, and his path was blocked before he could even leave our neighborhood. My family and I were spared from the madman's vengeance, but both of my friends had died because of a mere prank. He was caught to pay for his crimes, but I am still very much aware that all of this had happened because of the stupid thing we did, just to pass time.